I just want to add a little bit more to my previous discussion of hypocrisy in the New Testament. So I'm still looking at hypocrisy, some history of the concept. We're still in the Bible, we're still in the New Testament, part two. So previously, I talked about Jesus' encounters with the Pharisees and all that. So go back and have a look at that video if you haven't seen it. All I want to mention now is something that Jesus picks up on, again, that comes from the Old Testament. Now, if you recall in the Old Testament, have a look at that video that I did on hypocrisy in the Old Testament. But we talked a bit about the dead and the notion of you got to be careful about being around a dead human body because of the threat of contamination. Now, exactly what does that mean? But you become unclean in order to get back into a temple or whatever. You'd have to be cleansed, and you can be unclean for several days, even by accidentally coming into contact with a dead body, even your parents or family. You got to be very careful about this stuff according to the traditions of the time. And as I mentioned, because they didn't have really like well-marked graveyards and things like that, they would bury people in outcroppings of rocks. There was always a risk of unintentionally or accidentally encountering a dead body and thereby becoming unclean. So they would whitewash these tombs. Well, this notion of being unclean and whitewashing tombs, Jesus in Matthew 23 verses 27 to 28, he picks up on that and he says the hypocrites are like whitewashed tombs, right? They're all lovely and beautiful and clean on the outside, and on the inside they're full of dead bones and filth, right? So pretty sort of nasty imagery happening here, picking up on stuff that was you can find back in the Old Testament. And Jesus is saying, don't be like that, right? Now, this suggests that, that people might be like a hypocrite and they know they are, but it also suggests that, oh, geez, I didn't realize I was being hypocritical. So we have two kinds of reflections on this dichotomy of nice on the outside, bad on the inside, where someone knows it and is deliberately doing it, or where someone maybe doesn't know it and is accidentally being a hypocrite. So this and this harkens back as well to the Old Testament, back to the 2 Samuel 12 verses 1 to 9, and have checked that out about Nathan and King David, where King David's throwing his weight around, being a hypocrite, and Nathan sort of points out his hypocrisy. That points out King David's hypocrisy to King David, saying, hey, you're being a hypocrite here, and King David probably wasn't really aware of that. So now we can think about the unconscious hypocrisy, or let's just be a little bit more neutral, the non-conscious hypocrisy. That could come in two ways, where it's completely unconscious, like where it's like, oh, I wasn't aware of it at all, right? You're simply unaware that you're being a hypocrite. And then someone points it out and it's like, oh, really? I was completely, totally, all the time unaware of it. That's possible, but the more interesting and more complicated and philosophically controversial one is the self-deceptive. And these are not quite the same thing. Both are kind of, like an unaware of the hypocrisy, but with self-deceptive, you may have consciously deceived yourself, right? Consciously worked to believe that you're better than you really are, right? And are you still being a hypocrite if you honestly believe you're a good person, but you're actually not that good of a person, but you are proclaiming to the world and acting as if you're such a good person? So this is a notion that is being raised, don't be a hypocrite either unconsciously or a self-deceptive hypocrite, where you've even convinced yourself that you're better than you really are. So you've consciously deceived yourself. Now that raises an interesting question. Can you consciously deceive yourself? Now, in the everyday, ordinary life, we do talk about people like, yeah, well, believe what you want to believe. We say that as if belief is under some kind of conscious control. Is it really? Can you really just believe what you want to believe, right? It seems like people do it, but are they really believing stuff just because they want to believe it? In other words, sometimes philosophers call this, is belief a voluntary action? Can we actually make ourselves believe things that we just want to believe? I desire to believe this. You know, I want to believe, I desire to believe, and by just working at it, I can make myself believe things. Or can I just merely act like I believe it? I really cannot truly believe things just on the basis of sheer will. But anyway, so all this stuff, very interesting, you know, to try and figure out is hypocrisy something really conscious or unconscious or a will or whatnot. Again, we just see that this concept of hypocrisy has a rich and interesting history and is pretty subtle in places. All of this now, the whitewashed tombs, the hypocrisy of the hypocrite, and all this, as we'll see in a later video, that all this stuff will turn up in some fantastic imagery in Dante's Inferno. So stay tuned for that, and see you next video.